it was quite a journey, you could say. But I would say growing up, both myself, my family, people in the neighborhood, at most, were cultural Christians, if that makes sense. So the belief was there in God, but even my parents, for example, maybe in 35 years, the church maybe 6 or 7 times, and that nobody was really the Bible thumpers that we think about.
Yeah.
But there's still that identity there, and the culture, the neighborhood being majority Puerto Rican, and my family and having Irish and Italian ancestry and Roman Catholic identity, but nobody really talks about it much. And so I would say we grew up Christians, but not very good ones. Does that make
Okay.
But that would be about it. And then most of my adult life, I was really agnostic for a long time.
Yeah.
And maybe a couple years ago, when I was in the Philippines,
Yeah.
and my fiance now, and she's also a Christian, not necessarily practicing, but still has that belief, and the family and brought me back to it a little bit. So I would say, and this is where it gets interesting, I believe in the Christian God, but not the Bible.
Okay.
Or at least not most of it. And I'm not a big fan of the institutions, but I think they do and could have a place.
Okay. Okay. So just to kind of recap, the agnosticism wasn't on a deist level over any type of God. Was it specifically just to Christianity? You were agnostic about Christianity. Did you look into any other religions, for example, like Judaism or, Islam or Hinduism, for example, or were you just agnostic specifically to Christianity for that time frame?
I would say for all of them really at that time, and even today I still research religions and read about them and compare and contrast, but I guess the others, and even Christianity to a lesser extent, but I would look into them more scholastically and try to find them to practice them, but just for research purposes and just reading about them and the history and how they work.
Okay, what brought that on, do you think? I mean, how did you get to that point? I know you said it kind of was a transition from, your parents were doing it, you were doing it, and then you kind of transitioned into this agnosticism, but now you've kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, you've kind of disbanded from the scripture for the most part, but you're still, you still believe in the Christian God. But how did that come about? How did that, what was that point where you said, the scripture isn't for me necessarily? Like, was there any specific quote in the book, or was it, how did you come to terms with that?
Well, thing is, I mean, it's hard to trust something written by humans. And if you look at the history of it, I believe the books we have access to in English were written and sanctioned by politicians, whether it was King James or even further back. So it's hard to, I would say, if you're a believer or not, but to blindly believe something that essentially was sanctioned by the state, and that's where I said in the past, but statism is really the world's most dangerous religion, in my opinion. And so you have books over thousands of years in different languages, and some were approved and others weren't, and why. And it's been the power structure pushing it, and even a lot of the books, or once it was compiled together, and Jesus was already dead for 300 plus years. So, you know, I would take all of it with a grain of salt.
Okay. We are getting a little choppy. I'm not sure if it's the signal. I know we're calling from a long distance here, international, so we might get.
I am using Wi-Fi, so yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I mean that gives me a little bit more of an idea of you know, the, I guess, the conflict that you had with those writings, and I think I would agree. I mean, you know, humans are fallible, and I think that's a logical conclusion to say that there is some skepticism within you know, any writings. Now, I understand that you're still a believer in the Christian God. If I could, the follow up to the ending part of the religion talk would be, you know, is this subject to change? Is there anything that someone could present to you that would get you to pivot on your current belief?
It'd be hard to say, but I would say, really, of course, I can't pinpoint what that would be, but I question everything and always will, so I'm always open to evidence all the time, whether it's political views, philosophy, religion. The more I learn and see, so if evidence is there, or I believe in that evidence, then sure, anything's possible.
Okay, so that being said, if you don't mind me asking, how would you reconcile that yearning for evidence and coming to the conclusion that there is a Christian God?
That's a good one. Really don't know.
And I think that's a good answer. I think that's a good answer.
I don't know.
I definitely agree with you on that. Big old IDK on that. Okay, well, I really appreciate you sharing that with us. Let's go ahead and jump right into the meat of our conversation. We definitely want to start off with authority. If you could just kind of define, in your view, what authority is, and kind of just give us a breakdown. When we're saying authority, what do we mean?
I would say, and I break this into two parts. So you have legitimate authority and illegitimate authority.
Okay.
And what they both share, I guess, is power. Really, they both have power, and one is more natural, and the other's not. I can expand on that after.
Oh. Okay, so we have legitimate and illegitimate power. When you say power, in what sense?
In a sense of, I guess, almost control, but it doesn't always have to be control, you know.
Okay.
While I break down the roles, it's easier to answer this way. So I would say, if the authority is natural, then it would complement rather than, you know, the proverbial beating them over the head. So the parent and child, if that parent's a good one, you know, let's just assume that, teacher and student, employer and employee. So these roles, it would complement. It's kind of the saying of like a boss versus a leader, and one commands respect, the other demands respect. And then illegitimate would violate the non-aggression principle, which I can get into after. But essentially, either an institution, a state, or a person violating your natural rights. Now, the authority might be there, but it's illegitimate because they're violating your rights. So that could be anything from drug prohibition to, as a parent that even just screams and shouts or abuses a child.
Okay, so it's
these, so they have authority, but it's illegitimate. They're violating the rights of the other.
okay. So there's a scale to it. There's a you know, you have a systematic, and then you have more of an individual based level. Okay. Would you say? I mean, how does someone or something attain this status? How does somebody find themselves in the role of authority?
Well, really depends. Usually, they're propped up by the others. So whether good, just like a lot of things, people believe, and they believe that it is legitimate. And see, that's the thing. If, you know, we can use the government. So if you take the United States and 300 million people, everybody in mass, businesses and individuals, stop paying taxes. And say, you know, we don't believe in this anymore. The system would fall apart. So a lot of authority, it really keeps going and continues to exist because people believe in it. They believe it has value. For, you know, you can say that was conditioned, or it's not a natural thing anyway.
Okay, so the concept of authority.
Money.
Well, I was just going to say so you're saying the concept of authority is something that we put value into, and then if we were to strip that value, then there really isn't a ultimate way to determine who has authority. It's more of an inheritance that somebody would obtain authority maybe through another authority that somebody has decided is an authority. Is that accurate?
Right,
or
that's usually that sounds about right. That's usually how it works, I would say. Yeah.
Okay. If that's the case, if people can put value into it and, you know, propagate somebody into, you know, this authority, you know, and it has power, or, you know, to use your words, maybe a sense of control a little bit. What's to stop, you know, two people who are posed to do a task to both make themselves the authority over that task?
What's to stop?
I mean, can an individual give themselves authority, basically?
Well, no. Because humans being social creatures, it really depends on the others. Now, there's a way, I mean, either it can be by force and coercion, or it can be giving the other people in the group value. So, which is why I like anarcho-capitalism so much, because, you know, there would be no state, and the non-aggression principle states you cannot initiate force against others, period. And because
Agreed.
there's no state and people are dependent on getting along, then, you know, violating the NAP would be kind of suicide. You would be ostracized by the group. And, you know, counter to that, if you're giving people value, so if you're selling products people want, or helping other people, then people would gravitate toward you. So that would be more natural than today, you know, stay essentially because we said so.
Okay, so in that scenario, it's almost a group collective that has to. I don't want to use the word democracy, but in a sense, it would take extrinsic viewpoints that select an individual to have the authority couldn't give themselves a promotion, basically. They would have to adhere to what the society, the culture is deciding. Is that correct?
Correct. You know, nobody, you know, it would be like if I say today, okay, I'm the Prime Minister of Japan.
Right.
Because I said so. The people would say, no, you're not.
Yeah.
And I would say, but I gave myself the work that way. So, right, it has to be dependent on the group.
Now, if there are two individuals, back to the other scenario that I posed, if there's two individuals, I mean, how do they go about determining who has the authority over a specific task if they both want to appoint themselves? Or is it a wash?
It could be a wash, or they could both do it. I mean, it depends on what the task is.
Okay.
But I would say,
let's say washing a car, you know.
Because if there's two people, there's no group. So it's hard to say with just those two. So washing a car.
Yeah, like if they're washing a car and somebody has to wash it and somebody has to oversee it. I mean, if there's two people and one says, you know, I'm going to oversee it, you get to washing. And the other one says, I don't know about that. It's a little hot outside. I think I'm in charge and you're going to go wash. And then let's say, you know, person number 3 comes up and they say, okay, we're both going to be in charge. You go wash it. The third person could say, well, I'm in charge as well. I mean, 3 can turn into 10, turn into 100. I mean, how do we, if everybody was to claim that they were the president all at one time, wouldn't that undermine the authority?
Right. That's exactly right. I would say with the car scenario, and this happens all the time, and you see it at job sites, you see it in schools, and unfortunately what happens there is one person just ends up doing it because everybody's arguing over who needs to do what and nothing gets done. And then somebody finally, which is really manipulative, but that's what people do.
So you're going to play chicken until somebody caves, basically.
Right. And you see this all the time in politics, in schools, in companies. You see it quite a bit.
Definitely agree. I mean, you know, this is the basis or the foundation of a government shutdown, so to say. I mean, it's, you know, it's, for lack of a better phrase, you know, it's like a pissing contest, and who's going to have this authority. And exactly when those situations occur, you know, everybody takes their ball and goes home because they all want to play, you know.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I don't know if we touched on it, but I do want to bring it up just in case we didn't really thoroughly get into it. But the intended purpose. What is the intended purpose of authority?
I would say the intent, well, should be at least, and 9 times out of 10 it fails. You can turn on the news and see that, but
yeah, okay.
In theory, it's supposed to maintain order because you have so many humans and we're in a group, and ideally it would be to maximize the freedom of the individual. So if it worked the way I would say should be intended, because I think the intent over time has been sinister, but if it worked the way it should ideally, then yeah, it would be to protect the innocent and to make society function better because you have so many people.
Okay, so there's somebody appointed who maybe is very knowledgeable on this, you know, a given task, and maybe, you know, they're very knowledgeable. We'll just make up a scenario here. They're knowledgeable about cutting lawns and, you know, and doing you know, landscaping and things like this. They can't possibly landscape this entire mansion, so they're going to need assistance to do this, and the people that they're in charge of are going to, I guess, follow this authority figure because the intent behind it is to actually get the landscaping done and have it function in a smooth process.
Right, and that's a great scenario, because that's why I think capitalism and real capitalism as a principle, not the garbage we have now, and value, because in your landscaping scenario, everybody wins. So, these people need money. This guy needs help to cut all the lawns, and he has too much work. And so they're helping each other. So I would say so yes, he would be an authority being the employer, but if he's a good one, they would really take care of each other. And both sides benefit, and everybody is happy. Does that happen all the time? No, of course not, but that's the ideal.
Okay.
So both sides win. So you have authority, and then the employees are subordinate, technically, but that doesn't mean one's better than the other. That would be a better way to put it.
Okay. So it's
you have an authority figure and a subordinate one, but they're still equal in a sense. Hot and cold, yin and yang. If you want to put it, they work together.
Okay. Do you think authority? I think you touched on it a little bit, but I do want to unpack it just a little bit. Do you think authority is universally natural, with a scope including all tangible and intangible things? Do you think that authority? I guess the best way to put it is, do you think authority is necessitated within the natural order of things? Like, for example, maybe not a specific claim to living things, but also in inanimate objects.
It is, in a sense, on a very you try to think.
Like, would you say gravity is an authority?
Well, I guess you could say that. Yes, I mean, you can't. I said, nah. That would be a natural authority. Sure, we could use that word. It doesn't sound very scientific. It's more philosophical, but sure, it works. It works. Even animals, if you look at wolves, and the other wolves follow the pack. Or, even ants, and the ants have a queen, and so even animals have their own societies and their own roles.
Would you say that something like the sun or the atom could claim or be given that status as an authority?
I think in practice, it acts as an authority in its own way, but it can't be authority. And I would put that to the other one, only because I think these are roles that only we as people, as humans, understand these concepts.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, the sun doesn't understand concepts, as
right.
far as I know.
Right.
And even animals, like, I think the animals can, and they might follow, the leader of the pack, but they might not know they're doing that. It just happens, I don't think, the animals think about why they're here, or I think these are very human questions. And that would be the same case for authority. So I don't think they might not even know that they're an authority. Right.
So would it require the insight and knowing I'm, you know, whether it's a living thing or an inanimate object, would it require that insight or that knowing of the power or I guess the control that you would have over other things? Is that required for it to be considered an authority, or is it inherent within whatever it is, simply by definition?
I would say, in order to be given the role, then both sides would have to know, even if they don't. So, if, you know, if it's not even alive, you know, something like, you brought up the sun.
Yeah.
Then to us it could be considered an authority, but that's only because we know about these things.
Okay,
so yes, you know, you would have to know.
Okay.
But you might not know. But you know, it would be, you know, with humans. But that's.
Let me throw this one. If I'm I don't know, if I'm an immigrant to America, right? Let's say I'm an illegal immigrant to America. I'm fleeing. You know, maybe I'm a Syrian refugee or something like this, and I'm coming to America, and I'm just completely ignorant to Congress, who the president is, you know, the police, or you know, or any of the workings of these systems, right? Does my ignorance, my unknowing, undermine the authority, or is the authority inherent within reality, regardless of me knowing about it?
It's still reality because you have the other members of the group. So
okay, fair enough.
That comes back to being the social creatures, yeah. So, you know, as if anybody could do that, I could rob a bank right now that I didn't know, so that doesn't work. But it comes back to, you know,
fair enough.
That's why I love that non-aggression principle, because it's so basic, and it would make the world better if you followed it. So you cannot initiate force on other people, period. You have a right to self-defense. You can defend innocent third parties, but other than that, you know, you don't violate people, and that would be a natural authority. You know, if you know, we're in a bar and I push you, and you say, "Hey, don't do that," and I do it again, and you punch me in the face, you have the right to do that. It's a natural authority to self-defense or defending an innocent third party. So I initiated force on you, and you have the authority over yourself. It's natural, and you have the right to defend it.
Okay. At what point does this isn't one of the questions, but I am intrigued with this line of discussion. But at what point does a person have authority over themselves?
Well, in a sense, always. And the problem, and that's a tricky one too.
Yeah.
I would guess.
Excuse me.
I mean, there's natural law, so you do have rights, and that comes back to government. I know I use the state a lot, but you know, government can't grant them. And so, an example, a lot of the pro-gun people, which I'm very pro-gun, by the way, they'll say, well, the Second Amendment gives me the right to bear arms. No, it doesn't. You have that right naturally. Government can only take rights away. And some governments take away more than others. So
That's a good point.
If you're
To
North
I haven't.
Korea compared to America, and North Korea takes away more rights than the American government does, for example. But neither government gave any rights. So some take away more than others. That's what it is, and people really make this mistake all the time.
That's a very interesting viewpoint. I never really thought of it like that. That the government isn't providing the rights. You know, they are appropriating or consolidating the rights. Some people might argue, though, that in breaking away from the British Empire, we've essentially created our own rights with the Bill of Rights or the Constitution or things like this, these documents. But what you're saying is these are just documents. These are rights to the individual, and the majority that we've elected to be the overseers, right, that know what's good for us, right, or are supposed to know what's good for us. They're saying, well, this is good for you guys, but we're going to take this away. We don't think this is good. So that's a very interesting conversation. I never really thought of it like that before. So I really appreciate that. I am going to think more on that.
Oh, we can do that. Yeah, I mean, you know what I'm saying? Think about it. It's like if like even driving, or let me back this up, and especially with everything going on with the police and the state and all of that in America now, and essentially there's no crime that I'm looking for. And it sounds extreme, but if you look at Eric Garner, selling Lucy's and got choked to death, or even the smallest crimes that are not real crimes, by the way.
Yeah.
And these government goons, you get them on the bad day, and you might be dead. And that's where they're using force to push their authority, and they're violating the rights of the individual.
Now, whether the individual's authority or the imposed, I guess we'll use that word, imposed authority, either side, as a collective, would you say that it is necessary? Why or why not?
It's necessary on a very, very small scale. But the way it's evolved, I guess the concept is natural in its own way, but the way it's always been abused, and that's been a problem, and still is to some extent with organized religion. But if you look back on the history, that's why even religion or atheism, so I was saying, the two extremes can have the same outcomes, but the one common denominator is the state. You can say ISIS, that wants to be a state, that wants to be a government, or Saudi Arabia, where religion is the government, or even nation. And a lot of the problems, and if you look, religion has killed a lot of people, of course. But when it's done, a state.
Oh, the phone's the phone's breaking up just a little bit. The phone's breaking up just a little bit. If you could just back up just a little bit. What were you saying?
Okay, so where did it start breaking?
You were saying, religion has basically been responsible for a lot of deaths.
Okay, right. And when, on any large scale, when it's done this, religion was the state, or was merged with the state, or wants to be a state. So examples of this would be ISIS today, but they want to be a state. Or Saudi Arabia, that is a state.
Okay.
Or Christianity before the Reformation. And then on the flip side of that, you have Mao's China, or Stalin's Russia, where you had state-sanctioned atheism, where essentially they replaced God with the state. So the common denominator on both sides is the state. You know, if you have a Muslim man in Japan, and he does his thing and lives his life, and he's not bothering anybody, then it's not really good or bad necessarily, or any religion for that matter. But then the issue is really state power, and it's used as another tool.
It's very interesting. So, if authority is natural to the individual and is, I guess, transcendent from the individual to the group, to where maybe a collection of people, or even one solitary person, has some kind of supreme authority over everybody else. You would just to recap, you were saying that it's necessary in a very small scale, but it sounds like you see in your viewpoint that it would be beneficial maybe to do away with authority, or at least authority in the shape and smell of the state.
Well, that would be the end goal. That I don't see that happening in our lifetime, but really, I mean, you could keep authority for now. So
Right.
Nobody's gonna. I mean, you couldn't abolish the state today, even if you wanted to. But just making it smaller, and on a smaller scale, in the sense, I mean, if we only prosecuted real crimes, for example, and what is a crime? A crime has a victim. No victim, no crime. So, you know, rape, murder, things like that, that would be fine. You know, that would actually be a good role for authority. If you have a 5-year-old that gets raped, of course, child can't defend themselves from that. The others in the group step in and punish the perpetrator. But on the other hand, if somebody's smoking weed in their house, not bothering anybody, to come in with guns and put them in a cage, that's immoral.
I think I agree
Since
with.
the action
I think I agree with that. You know,
violates somebody's
victimless
rights, you know?
crimes. I think
That's what Joe is saying. The action, if you're not harming someone else and you're not violating their rights, then it's not a crime. You know, even something driving without a license, okay, but there's no victim besides the state making money, and we all know a license doesn't mean anything as far as if you can drive or not. But they're not getting their money and they're not controlling you. So something as simple as that, but is it really a crime? Who was hurt? Nobody. It's not a crime.
So how does the established authority operate in that sense? I mean, if we're saying, hey, you know more about landscaping, we're going to do the work. You're the authority. You're in charge. Does the authority get to then stack on or pile on additional powers where they say, oh, and yeah, you're cutting the lawns and stuff, right? And I'm in charge, and this is the timetable that you're following, and this is the pay that you've agreed to, and whatever. But also, I get to have sex with your wife, as well as part of, or how do they like for instance, I mean, how do we get in a position where people are being caged, as you said, for victimless crimes? How does the authority that's been voted for get to make those types of decisions? I mean, you would think that the people, electing the authority, I guess would be the best way to say, would be able to also say, we don't agree with this, and that would be done away with. It's almost like once the authority is decided, then you have no power to take the authority away.
Right. That's the tragedy. If you look at even recent decisions, recent legislation over the past decade, say the Patriot Act or the no-fly lists, things like that, of that nature. That's why you don't want to give your freedom away, because you never get it back. And it only grows and grows in scale and scope.
It's like a big prom night. You're giving away your freedom card, right?
Right, and the United States is an interesting example because, on the one hand, there's been a certain small degree of freedom, but if you look at it, and you brought up the document earlier, but every president in U.S. history violated the Constitution in one form or another.
Yeah, well,
every single one. And then also, not even all Americans have rights. At least for the first almost 200 years, if not longer. So, that's an example.
That's a strong example,
Even
yeah.
Even the authority in itself is inconsistent.
I agree. Okay.
But people believe in it, and that's the thing. So, and you have propaganda and.
Well, then even like,
media,
well, again, I mean, even we just agreed that even if the belief or the value was taken back, right? If they reneged on, you know what, you're not an authority anymore. Those landscaper
Right.
people could quit the job, right? But that scenario, I guess, doesn't hold up to on a larger scale, where if all of a sudden I decided that that's not my president, I'm still affected by
Of course.
the society
Yeah.
that I live in.
Yeah, that's the problem, because it can be done. So, I don't know where I read this quote, but they said, someone said somewhere, war is when the government tells you who the enemy is, and revolution is when you know who the enemy is. And in order for that to work, you have to have enough people to believe in it, one way or the other. So, the scenario you brought up now, so you said, well, I don't believe in this, but it's you versus the group. So, and part of this is being social creatures that people are, and the other part is people believing in this, and private public school, and just not knowing anything else.
Yeah.
It would be if you lived in a cave, you were born in a cave, and were raised in this cave, and that's all you know is this cave. So you have nothing to compare it to. And that's what's hard about, even anarchy, but it's never been tried in so long. So we can talk about concepts all day, but there's nothing to compare it to.
Well, the only thing I could maybe compare it to is, because I'm a big proponent to the minority view being essential in convincing the majority view. Like like slavery, for example. I won't get into slavery for too long here, but it took the minority view to say we don't believe in this anymore, to then kind of infectiously spread to become the majority view, Whereas, if I'm to go, just follow this scenario here for a minute. If I was to travel back in time and people are smoking cigarettes, and I'm going up and I'm saying, hey, I don't think smoking cigarettes is, good for you. They cause this X, Y, Z. I'm gonna be looked at as the crazy person. I'm gonna be in the minority. But time has shown that the minority can infectiously cause the pivot of viewpoints and perspective and become the majority view. So I don't think anarchy is impossible. Not that I'm condoning that or anything. I'm pretty much on the fence. I'm very much couched in what is best in any situation, but
right.
I wouldn't put past people to maybe have an anarchy if the situation I don't want to say required it, but if the situation became such a way that was the ultimatum, I think it very well could see the light of day. I think anarchy is a very real reality on a day-to-day basis.
Right. I'm on the fence as well. Like I said, you couldn't end the state tomorrow, but I would say at least get authority out of our lives where it doesn't need to be, and make it small in scope. So more
like a reboot.
Even like minarchy or volunteerism, as much wherever possible. More Ron Paul's views, for example.
Okay.
When he ran, were good because they shrunk government down. So that would be the goal. The end goal, but that might take 1,000 years. But at least just looking at these roles that authority takes on, and is it necessary? Who does it benefit? What does it cost? And then, do we need this? So the drug war, more people die from the drug war than drugs themselves. Destroys lives, it destroys communities. And even the drug war and prohibition itself, and you've seen this, caused opium to be more expensive, and they produced heroin because it was cheaper because of the drug war, or crack, which that's a funny one too, because the government actually invented crack.
Yeah.
And put that out on the streets, so that's a whole nother topic. So a lot of the problems they create themselves anyway. The authority themselves creates problems. Government will break your legs, sell you a wheelchair, and if it wasn't for them, you couldn't get around.
Oh, I see. So it's having the cake and eating it too. Okay. So does the concept of authority regress ad infinitum? Or can there be an ultimate and final authority? It's almost like tracing the ancestry of authority back to, we get back into inheritance of authority, or that there's always an authority giving authority to another. Is it if we were to trace back the first time somebody was an authority, right? Putting our thinking caps, and we're going back in time to the first time somebody was an authority. Was there an authority before that? I know you're coming from the belief in a Christian God. Do you think that there was an authority? Does authority go back for infinity, or is there an ultimate?
I think it does. But in a natural way. What would the authority be? When we were hunters and gatherers. So maybe the authority would be the best hunter, or the best warrior that can defend from others trying to harm the community or the tribe, or they can save lives, or the mothers, the best cooks, you know, if they discover fire and you didn't cook the meat right, then you'd get sick and die. You know, there was no medical care. Things of that nature.
But
so in that sense, it would be an authority because people would admire and look up to these people.
okay, but would you say that, you know, in your view, that the Christian God was the authority over them?
Possibly. I mean, that's a hard. You'd have to look at dates. I don't have the answer. I don't.
Okay.
But that's a good question.
Yeah, it's the idea that if authority is infinite, I mean, my next question was going, and I respect that you know conceded to that point that you don't know the answer, and that's very honest of you. But what I was going to say, I mean, you don't have to answer, but what I was going to bring up was, you know, if authority is infinity, then I would ask, if authority is inherited, right, or it takes an authority to provide an authority, is there an ultimate authority? Because if there was, you know, let's say the God of Abraham or you know, Allah or any one of these other gods, did it take an authority to provide that authority, you know, or was authority birthed in, I don't know, it's in some type of simultaneous.
That's a good one, yeah. And that's often the paradox. That's and that's the question. I think nobody can really answer, you know, because it's kind of like, did God create himself, or, you know, so I get where, you know, that question goes in.
No, but I think
so like, I would say it is.
Okay.
But then if I'm asked why, well, I don't know.
But I think you did have a decent answer a little bit earlier, because you said that the authority is natural to the individual, so that would kind of coincide with your viewpoint that, you know, your belief in the Christian God, their authority could be natural to themselves. But what I was getting at is how is authority birthed? I guess what is the origin of authority? But okay, well we'll leave that. I do want to get into subordinate. I know we talked about it very briefly because it was necessary to kind of have contrast to really nail down what we were talking about with authority. But now that we have traversed that, I do want to get into subordinate. So the subordinate role, if you could just please explain what it means to be a subordinate, and how does someone attain this status? Or is it a status attained or kind of imposed?
It could be both. So the subordinate role, you're following someone or something. So you could be following an individual, a person, a government, a document, a belief, a philosophy, and it could be by choice, or you could be forced to, but you're following something.
How do you get into this role? How are you, do you just hear something that you like and you say, that's for me? Or are you born into a subordinate role?
Well, I think everyone, in a sense, you know, being an infant, and then a child, so of course you're naturally born into that role in that sense. And then some of it could be by choice later on.
So subordinance is inescapable. So subordinance is inescapable. I mean, you're born into subordinance.
Correct. In that sense, yeah.
Does subordinance necessitate authority, or vice versa? Does it take a
They
subordinate
both,
to contrast and say this is the authority, or does it take the authority to label the other person the subordinate? I guess if you take the viewpoint of we're born into the subordinates, then the authority is predetermined.
it's a bit of both,
Okay.
really, but most of the time, it's really the subordinate roles, especially when you're talking about states or institutions. Then, no matter what they do, if the people in mass said no and pushed back, there's nothing they could do about it. So in that sense, the subordinates facilitate the authority. But then when it's more natural, the parent or child, or even a job where both complement each other,
Mm-hmm.
then they both go hand in hand.
Okay, so it's kind of a two-way street, really. It's not that one begets the other. It's almost like they both have to be in existence at the same time. You can't have authority without subordinates, it sounds like, or you can't have subordinates
Right.
without authority. Okay.
Right, right.
Is the subordinate accountable for their actions if done in the name of or by the order of an authority? Like the military, for example. If a military member was to kill some civilians or innocent civilians at the order of an authority, are they accountable to that action, or are they following orders and the overseeing authority is accountable? Or are all parties accountable?
That's a good one. That's a good one, because many people disagree with me on this, but the military is its own example, and so I would break this down. I would say it depends on the rank of the individual, really, and then the order. So what I mean by that, because the military, as we both know, once you sign up, you really lose most of your rights. So
True.
the ability to say no. So if you were ordered to bomb this building, okay, but now you're only two, then I would say essentially you were forced to do that. So I would say the order giver would be held accountable for that crime.
So
because
the subordinate has a get out of jail free card because they wash their hands clean of any wrongdoing or any immoral act, simply because the authority has forced them into doing so. Is that correct?
most of the time, but of course, I would say that's on a case-by-case basis, and especially if you're in a country with a draft, that even changes it more as people are forced into it. And I see the moral argument from the other side, but
Mm-hmm.
it's easy to say when you're not put into that position,
I understand.
and who knows. But the difference with the military is that you're really not an individual in that sense. Now, the police, on the other hand, when they try to do that, no, you're a civilian. You can quit if you don't like your job. You can quit if you don't believe that. It's really no.
That is a good
Or to
contrast.
say no.
Yeah.
You know, so it's hard to say now on a moral level, and it really depends on what it is. You know, it's saying, I think we as humans try to group everything together, and it's really impossible. Like, every act, everything should be a case-by-case basis. Yes, there are trends. Yes, you can kind of group actions together, but essentially every situation has its own merit.
Okay. So, I mean, well, I use one-off scenarios just to give us, a general taste of, some kind of a foundation for us to have a conversation. So, if I bring up something like Charles Manson, for example, he didn't physically kill anybody, but
Right.
he was accountable because he was the
Right.
authority in that scenario. Um, the the people that I pay you the compliment of assuming that you're well versed on Charles Manson. Um,
Right.
but the people that carried out those wicked acts, um, I would say, in my opinion, I would say that they were accountable for their actions. Well, when it comes to Charles Manson himself, I mean, those people didn't have to kill those people.
Exactly.
They could
I
have quit.
agree.
So how do we as a society um, penalize or punish, chastise Charles Manson? I mean, you could take this to any song lyric or video game or movie, to be accountable for the subordinates to those phrases or images or ideologies.
Right. Those people, they made a choice, and I mean, that's the bottom line. I think, yes, he brainwashed them or whatever, but in the end, they chose to do it, and I think it's a cop out to blame him, and it's almost making the others out to be victims. And
Exactly.
no, he, that was a choice that they made, and people make him out to be the bad guy, but then I see where you're going now. Yeah, he couldn't do anything, without them.
Okay, true. Right. So, I mean, that's the contrast I see here. Something like Charles Manson being the authority, and you have these wicked people. I mean, not to say that Charles Manson wasn't deranged or had unpopular views, but, did he kill anybody? No, as far as we know, anyway, on the record.
Right,
Um,
right,
but then you have, the general in the military giving an order to the subordinates that are, just to backtrack, killing these individuals, these civilians, these innocent civilians. Stark contrast of the two scenarios. It sounds like we're in agreement that Charles Manson didn't actually do anything other than use his
right,
First
right.
Amendment. And then in the military scenario, it's I mean, would you pivot on that position and say that well, maybe the generals aren't, um, or would you say it's different because there are repercussions, such as AWOL or
Correct. That's the big difference.
okay,
That's the big difference is, you only, your freedom is so limited. And with the Charles Manson scenario, they have a choice. A real choice. I mean, yes, we all have choices, but, they have a real choice, I would say, versus, those repercussions. If you're wrong, because, yes, I mean, you have the Geneva Convention, yes, you can refuse.
yes,
And most of the time it should work, but in the chance that it doesn't, and leading up to that, there's a lot of repercussions, and if you're wrong, well, good luck with that. So that would be the difference. And of course, that's why I said, case by case basis, because it really depends on the situation too. Where Charles Manson, they're civilians, they have a choice. They weren't, I mean, they were manipulated, I would say, but it was still more choice. They had more freedom, let's say, to exercise
Okay.
their actions.
Would you say that, or how should I say, does subordinates come to an end eventually? Can it be escaped to begin with?
No, not in a society anyway. I mean, if you want to live in the woods and hunt wild animals and pick berries and live all by yourself, but then even in that sense, you're still subordinate to nature, I guess, and the other animals and the weather, things like that. So in a sense, it's inescapable.
Okay, so even an authority could be is subordinate. So even an authority is subordinate.
Oh, of course, yeah. That's like the old saying, you know, your boss has a boss. You know,
that takes us back to the previous question. Your boss has a boss. That is a good point. So no matter how much authority you have, you are, as far as we know anyway, you are subordinate to naturalistic, your naturalistic environment, or
right. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do want to share something with you just before we part ways.
Yeah.
I was reviewing an experiment. I think it was in the 60s. Don't quote me. I believe the 60s or 70s. But it was basically, you might be familiar with this. It was a shock therapy experiment where they had somebody come in. Everybody's in on it, but the person.
Oh yes.
You know.
I know the study. That was interesting. Yes.
Yeah. So just for anyone that doesn't know, you know, they have somebody in a back room, invisible to the person that's unknowing that everyone's in on this, and they'll have them ask them a few questions, right? So the unknowing person will ask a few questions to the person in the back room. If they get anything wrong, they'll deliver a shock to them at a specific voltage. You know, things like which of these doesn't belong, bird, you know, tiger, lion, river, you know, and if they say river, you give them a shock, right? And then they go to the next series of questions. And depending on the continuity, you know, if they keep getting things wrong, the voltage is increased. And it gets to a point where, you know, to kind of fast forward through this, it gets to a point where the shock that would be delivered is obviously going to kill that person.
Right.
You know, and they look right at the authority figure, the scientist wearing the white coat, and they say, you know, I'm not going to do it. You know, he's screaming. They can hear the other person screaming from behind the wall, and they're at odds with their morality on this. And the authority figure will point and say, you do it because you agreed to do it, and I'm in charge. And, you know, it might take them 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, but they go ahead and do it. They push that button and they deliver that shock. And, you know, it's none of it's real, obviously, but
right.
These people thought it was real. And it's almost like because the authority or the perceived authority, this is the larger question, I suppose, because of a perceived authority telling you to do something, it's almost like you're shrugging off your responsibilities and your accountability, because you have a justification in doing what you did, and you know this is your excuse if somebody were to question your judgment in that moment. They fought it for a whole 5 minutes at max in some of the scenarios. Only to carry out the action regardless, you know? And, I mean, what is your viewpoint on that? You as an individual, Justin, is there an authority that you will absolutely follow regardless of the conflict with your moral compass? Or do you read between the lines and understand that maybe this requires some more discussion or exploration before I continue on? I mean, how do you deal with authorities in your day-to-day life?
Really, I would say I would try my best and to see to not violate other people's rights, and it's just hard to say. You never know, and nobody knows till they're in that situation. But
so let's say you're in the situation.
I would stick to my values. So in that experiment, or
let's say, I mean, well, I can't use the experiment because you have prior knowledge to the conclusion to that experiment. But let's create a thought experiment here. Let's just say you are told that you have to fire somebody, and nobody else knows this, but you know it, that this person is actually a good friend of yours and has told you that if they ever lost this job, because they have 4 kids and they are a single parent, if they ever lost this job, they would kill themselves. And you were ordered to fire them for poor performance. Okay, and they have a history of this performance. It's not a one-off. They have a substantial amounting pile of evidence, and some unscrupulous things that they have done, in the job that you wouldn't agree with. Just bad business, and you're told you need to fire this person by your authority. Do you fire that person knowing full on well that they have a very high likelihood of ending their lives? Or do you refuse to give that order at the risk of your own suffering? The ultimatum is you fire them or you're fired, and knowing that this person has expressed to you prior to any of this knowledge that if they were ever to lose this job, they would end their lives.
Right. I mean, that's a hard one.
Sorry about that.
Trying to answer that easily. No, that's a good one. I guess the best case I would really try to do, or what I would do if I was in that situation, well, I would try to put it off and postpone it as long as possible to find another job, another position, either in the company, and if that doesn't work, outside of the company, and hopefully with the pay as close as possible, and vouch for that person so they could transition into other employment.
Okay, that's
I
ideal.
Fire them, but just don't leave them hanging.
That's ideal, but let's say you found out that day you got to fire them by lunchtime, or you're fired, and you find out on the spot. You have no preparation, no time to set a lifeboat up, for your own job seeking, and you're put on the spot basically.
Okay. Okay, so then the next two. Let me see. So I guess in that case, if there's nothing else, because it sounds like, so you're saying on the spot.
Yeah, knowing that what you're going to do.
Maybe, and it depends on this company how much authority I have, of course, but.
Right.
I would try to do it in a way where. Okay, so the next ideal course of action, I would try to make it look like a layoff or a downsize, or I would try to do it in a way where not fired for that, so they could still get unemployment. So at least they would have some income coming in, and then try to assist them finding something else. So that would be the next course of action.
So you would go through with.
I still got rid of them.
You would go through with firing them. Okay.
At least they're not just fired. Right.
Okay. Yeah,
and
that's.
Then if that didn't work and that failed, then I would just refuse, but try to. I guess I would try to strategically refuse. And then when I'm fired for not firing them, I guess, but then have evidence, or at least make it look like the evidence is there that I was wrongfully terminated, so I could get unemployment. And then ultimately, if they're still fired,
right,
then I'm not the one that fired them.
Right.
Kind of thing, and then I got fired too.
Right.
But, I mean, that's the only ways but I wouldn't just, you're fired because I was told so. No, like, I would really try.
That's good.
1, 2, and 3, these 3 ways.
That is good. I 100% agree with you. And you that was an uncomfortable, sounds like an uncomfortable scenario. You had to process the consequences of your actions, and you compromised with some suffering of your own. I mean, I 100% agree with you. That is not the common view. I'll go ahead and put out there. That's not the common view of most people. But most people will, just in my opinion, will be subordinate to the authority, regardless of the consequences of their actions. And you seem to take the time to say, okay, this is the authority, and I do respect this authority, and but you're willing to second guess the value of those decisions and the impact that they have.
Correct. And it's funny you brought up the employment scenario and all that, because that really hits close to home. I haven't been in that exact situation, but in similar on both sides. But yeah, I was actually homeless before and all kinds of problems. So, I mean, so something like that, somebody's income and survival. So that's something I couldn't just blindly follow the authority, and it hits really close to home. So I have an insight maybe most people don't, and that might be part of the reason. But yeah.
Really appreciate you having this convo with me, Justin. Justin Thompson in Okinawa, Japan. I'm going to go ahead and get this uploaded as soon as possible. Did you have any questions for me before we part ways?
No, not at all. But I like what you're doing. This is great. Well, I do an unrelated question, but are you still doing the music, or are you just full-time into the philosophy now? What else are you up to?
Well, I do get some emails about, is this philosophy based? I mean, there is a lot of philosophy behind it, but I'm 100% dedicated to epistemology. I always have been. I've had these types of conversations before, never recorded, and it's just gotten to a point to where I'm like, man, I'm having 4-hour conversations with people, group conversations on my phone about consciousness, morality, and all types of convos. And people were like, well, why don't you record these so you don't have to have the same conversation? You could you could influence more people, or at least inspire more people to talk about these things. So that kind of like lit that fire under me to, why don't I record these conversations and not go to a quote unquote authority, like the leading psychologist on the issues of subordinate and authority, but the everyman, or the everywoman, just in their day-to-day, in their views. If I want to talk about apology and forgiveness, am I going to go to a family advocacy specialist, or can I ask, you know, Joe Blow at the gas station, what are your views on this? I'd prefer to get it from the layman, so to speak, because I think it's more of an enrichment, and it's more of an opportunity to see if we really know what we're talking about when we bring up these conversations. As far as the music's concerned, you know, since I had my daughter, she's turning 2 next month. Since I had my daughter, I haven't really, you know, had a chance to really record anything. I did record one track, maybe 6 months ago, but you know, it's been kind of few and far between. But I am itching to kind of do another track. As far as like the battles and things like that, I've you know, kind of, I feel like I've kind of did my thing, you know, with that. But yeah, I mean, I was really proud of like some of the music that you and I did. You know, those were some really good tracks, especially I mean, I still play some of those tracks that, you know, especially the one that you and I did. I think it was called Be Real or Get Real or something like that.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah, that was pretty good. I was playing that actually about a week ago. I was playing that. I like some of the lyrics that you had, and it sounded like it was a freestyle, so that was even more respect. But yeah, lately I've just been like, you know, I have kind of the gift of gab, you know, and I know a lot of my music was, you know, or is very aggressive or angry, but that was all based in the spirit of battle. And you know, I took a step back, and I started saying, well, you know, this is basically debate. I'm basically debating with somebody and trying to crush their arguments. And you know, it was a little bit immature. It's at some points I would if I knew somebody was homophobic, then I would say, well, what's the best way to get under their skin is to kind of use that ideology of thou dost protest too much. Well, you're so homophobic, it's maybe because you're homosexual, you know? So that's how I would combat those people. You know, someone like, you know, I hate to name drop, but I'll just use the initials. You know, someone like LC, you know, when I was doing those types of battles and stuff, it was interesting because, you know, it kind of plays into our discussion, to be honest, because you would have somebody like the authority of like a music website, you know, or someone that looks up to these, you know, people look up to this person, and someone from the minority that comes in as an outsider is immediately couched in rookie or untalented or whatever else, you know, whatever other synonym. And it became difficult to even get any footing because the authority had that power or had that control over the other people. So they could literally sneeze and people would be reacting to that versus something that had a little bit more depth. And that was the controversy that, if you, I don't know if you remember, but that was the controversy that I had with that person. Was I was in the minority view, or I was the minority coming in, challenging somebody that had an established authority over, you know, not to take away from their skill or anything like that. I probably sound very, very biased right now, but you know, the types, in my opinion, the types of things that person was saying versus the things that I was saying, I felt like I had a little bit more salami on the sandwich, you know, and that person was counting on the authority carrying them versus the actual work or the skill. But I haven't had to do any battles lately. Music wise, I do feel like I have some things to say. I kind of have I guess conquered a lot of the anger and things that I was going through. I'm kind of at a better point in my life, and I really appreciate the support.
Oh yeah, of
The,
course.
the whole idea behind the one good reason is just to get down to why do we think the way that we think, and do we have any good reason to think that way? And after having a detailed discussion, if we determine that you don't have a good reason of thinking the way that you do, maybe you'll pivot. Maybe you'll stop doing that. And you'll do something different. You'll do something better. We're talking about authority and subordinates. Maybe in my mind, I'm hoping once we hang up, that you're gonna think, man, am I an authority in any place in my life, or am I a subordinate? Why am I a subordinate? Why am I an authority? What types of things am I accountable for? That's what I want to take away from this. And a lot of people that will end up listening to this, I would hope that they would do the same, and it's good to record it so I don't have to have the conversation, this 1 hour and 32-minute ongoing conversation with each individual. They can all partake and listen and kind of eavesdrop on our brainstorming,
Right, and just to let the viewers know, realize I sound a bit choppy. This is I talk about these things all the time, but it's the first time being recorded, and I know that, so it's a little nervous, you could say.
No, you sounded very in control.
Sounds
You sounded very in control and very very confident.
So future ones will be better.
I was supposed to do one about reward and punishment before I got into authority and subordinate, but that one actually got postponed. I'm not going to get into detail on that, but I do have a method to the madness. Everything that I'm doing in a certain order for a certain reason. I did good and evil, apology and forgiveness, truth and falsity, friends and enemies. It's supposed to be reward and punishment, and then authority and subordinate. Because, I wanted to tie it all together to where you could be a subordinate to an authority and be friends or be enemies. And, I'm going to reveal, my overall opinion on all of this in this documentary that I'm going to be making called To Be Human. But
I saw that, To Be Human.
Yeah, To Be Human. So you are the. I really appreciate you doing this. You are going to be the liaison, I guess, for authority and subordinates as any excerpts that I might take from this for the documentary. Of course, the full interview raw will be uploaded to YouTube for anyone to see for free. The documentary, I will have a price for that, but 100%. I'm a little iffy right now. 100%, or maybe in the high 90s% of that will go to any charity that people that any charity that people might want to have me send that money to. But next up is supposed to be free will versus determinism. I really have to get into my headgear for that one, because obviously there is a lot of different angles that someone could take going into that. So that's going to be a very interesting conversation. So I'm going to try to find a theist to have a conversation with about free will versus determinism, and then following that, I definitely, people have been blowing me up for consciousness, but it's not time for that yet. I want to do other things before I get to that. And then the final thing I'm going to do is death, terms and conditions. But I also want to talk about morality as well. So death, terms and conditions is going to be the final thing that I do. But after you will be free will versus determinism, morality, consciousness, and then death, terms and conditions. And then I should have a good framework to begin the documentary at that point. But It's pretty much on a month-to-month basis. I still have to do the reward and punishment, as I said, but I'll see what happens with that.
It's great, you know. I wish you all the luck, and I really admire what you're doing. Other interviews were great, and the concept is great, and I think people really need this, especially today.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, man. I had a couple emails talking about the Xavier interview, the Xavier Hayes interview, excuse me. And yeah, a couple people were, you know, gay or you know, Baptist or whatever, and you know, yeah, they were experiencing suicidal thoughts and things like that, and then they felt very empowered seeing someone like Xavier Hayes, because that was very unique. I mean, that was very difficult to find somebody of that minuscule of a minority. I mean, if you could think about it, a black gay atheist, let alone someone willing to talk to somebody, you know, and be interviewed, that was very difficult. So you know, I really thought that was good to put out there, that people aren't, you know, as awkward as they think they are, as alone as they think they are, and other people do go through these things, and other people do prevail through these things. So your conversation with me, I think, will be very beneficial to a lot of people, to help them maybe even quit that job that they're at that has unethical practices, or to maybe look at themselves, and the next time they spank their dog, or the next time they spank their child, you know, or even ground their child, or rethink the ways, or rethink the roles that they're in. So I kudos to you, and I'm gonna go ahead and sign off, and I'll go ahead and get to work on uploading this.
All right, bro. Appreciate it, man.
All right, take care.
You too.
All right, bye.